Teal dear, let's go back to the to-do list. What's on it today?
Hey, Internet!
Oh, come on. No. I'm not doing it. I refuse.
Question. Have you ever worried that someone was lying about rape?
Alright, fine, I'll do Laci Green again, but I've got some ground rules. 1. No touching of the antlers or face. 2. No eye contact. 3. When we're done, we go our separate ways and pretend like this never happened. Okay? Okay. Let's do this.
Question. Have you ever worried that someone was lying about rape?
No, not personally, but it is a very real fear for a lot of people out there, given the ever-increasing prevalence, it seems, of false rape cases that are coming out in recent times.
Every single time a woman comes forward about having been abused by a beloved movie star, musician, TV star, YouTubers...
Oh, you're piggybacking off the back of the Tobuscus controversy. That explains why you're doing this now.
That star's fans immediately accuse her of lying.
Well, yes and no. Some will say she's lying, yes. However, others will simply maintain skeptical indifference. Skeptical indifference when it comes to the accusation of a crime is actually a completely healthy thing to do. The due process, after all, is innocent until proven guilty.
There are men's groups online that claim that women lie about rape 90% of the time.
Rather interestingly, for a Laci Green video, this one actually contains some citations. However, in this list of citations, there is not a single one that points to which men's group or men's organisation say that women are lying about rape 90% of the time. So I'm not going to out and out state that there is no men's group that says this, or no member of a men's organisation that says this, but I would be very intrigued to know which men's organisation is stating this, because as we'll see later on when we actually look at some of the figures, 90% is completely wrong. But then, so are the figures produced by Laci.
A sheriff in Idaho very recently claimed that they don't need a better system for rape kits which collect evidence because most victims are liars.
The majority of our rapes that are called in are actual consensual sex.
Is anyone else's quote mind sense tingling? Maybe that's just me, but I really can't help it when all we've got is a couple of sentences in a 5-second video snippet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly flesh out what this guy was saying and in what context, and we'll look at the video, of course, as well in its entirety. So the snippet that you just saw at the end of that is in regards to rape kits, and when they should be tested and when they shouldn't be tested. This snippet that Laci has taken from this sheriff is in regards to a change in law that was proposed that would enable clinics to send off rape kits rather than just law enforcement. In essence, allowing a sexual health clinic to use a rape kit and then send it off for analysis, sidestepping entirely the law enforcement agency. The reason that some people will object to this happening is that a rape kit does not actually ascertain whether or not a case of rape or sexual assault has happened. All it is a series of swabs taken from the alleged victim, usually orally, vaginally, and anally. These samples are then sent to a laboratory where they are stained and analysed, and all they're doing is testing for the presence of seminal fluid. And this is where that sheriff's quote becomes very important in context. A rape kit does not determine whether or not a rape happened. All a rape kit can determine is whether or not sex happened. Now, proof of sex can be very important in regards to a rape case, because it can confirm whether or not sexual activity happened. What it cannot confirm is whether that sexual activity was consensual or not. And as that particular sheriff has pointed out, if the majority of these so-called rapes are actually consensual sex, and you're sending these kits off to the lab, all you're doing is wasting the lab's time testing for something where they know they're going to find a positive result because consensual sex happened. The seminal fluid will be present and they will be able to find it. But if the sex was consensual, it's not a crime, it's just a waste of time. So with all that cleared up, if we now listen to what this guy is saying in its entirety, it might make a little bit more sense why he was saying that.
I believe the legislature needs to take a strong look at allowing law enforcement to do their job and not try to dictate what we need to do. I think they're trying to help. I really do.
The proposed legislation would create a statewide system of collecting and tracking the physical evidence in a sexual assault case. Part of that bill would give clinics the responsibility of sending rape kits for DNA testing. That's unless the victim requests otherwise. Currently, law enforcement is in charge of deciding if a kit should be tested.
They need to let us decide if we're going to send the kit in and when we send the kits in. Because the majority of our rapes, not to say we don't have rapes, we do, but the majority of our rapes that are called in are actual consensual sex.
Rowland says after interviewing an alleged rape victim, police often find it was not actually rape. Things just went too far and someone got scared.
It's a 17-year-old girl, and she had consensual sex with her boyfriend, but didn't know how to tell her parents. Or her parents are mad because she did have consensual sex, and well, you couldn't have said yes, you had to have been raped. What does that do to her down the road? What does it do to her partner?
And I mean, look, couldn't you or me or anybody in the world just make up a rape for attention to get revenge out of jealousy, as Toby Turner's mom posted on Facebook? Yeah, you could totally do that. But would you do that? And how often does that actually happen?
Yes, you could falsely accuse someone of rape for all of those reasons, or indeed many more. There have been a myriad of cases over the last few years, highly publicized cases where it has been found that the allegation has been completely and utterly false. Some of the reasons range from simply wanting to get revenge, wanting to get attention, wanting to hide infidelity, wanting to end relationships, mental illness, because the woman dreamed about it, because you failed your exams and need an excuse. I could go on, but I'm sure you're getting the idea. There are a lot of reasons why people falsely accuse others of rape. What makes all of these even worse is that not only does the accused often find that their life is completely ruined, with some of them even going on to commit suicide or indeed be beaten to death, but then, on top of that, the person who made the false accusation very rarely ever faces any jail time or any particular repercussion at all. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, these seemingly ever-growing number of lies actively harm people who are genuinely the victims of rape. Because an increasing number of lies being told about this crime does mean that ever-increasing numbers of people are going to hear about a genuine rape and say, "Oh well, are you just lying about it like all of these other people?" False rape accusations are, arguably, one of the most damaging things when it comes to people not being believed.
The FBI states that between 2 and 8% of rape reports are false.
Now, I'm gonna quickly jump in here, because this little snippet here is relevant to the points that she makes later, but I want to address this document in its entirety first. The document that she just flashed up on the screen, the Criminal Justice Information Services Division Uniform Crime Reporting Program, Reporting Rape in 2013, Summary Reporting System, User Manual and Technical Specification. I don't think I really have to tell you why I find it really confusing that she's shown this. This is a user manual. This is not a report of statistics. It does not contain anywhere within it the 2 to 8% rape figure that she is quoting. What it does do is give you a series of examples telling you what should be considered rape, what should be considered sexual assault, and then a guide on how you are supposed to fill out the necessary paperwork to report it as such. So this supposed citation doesn't actually give us any information whatsoever. However, because I'm me, I'm going to do some legwork. The 8% false reporting rape that the FBI have generated comes from this document, Section 2, the Criminal Index Offences Report. This document is from 1996, since apparently after that year the FBI stopped recording false rates of rape. Now, this document deals with a wide variety of violent crimes, but we're only concerned about the forcible rape section. And within the subsection of the nature of rape, there happens to be a very concise paragraph. As with all other crime index offences, complaints of forcible rape made to law enforcement agencies are sometimes found to be false or baseless. In such cases, law enforcement agencies unfound the offences and exclude them from crime counts. The unfounded rate or percentage of complaints determined through investigation to be false is higher for forcible rape than for any other index crime. 8% of forcible rape complaints in 1996 were unfounded, while the average for all index crimes was 2%. So this would appear to be where Laci has managed to get the 8% in her 2 to 8% boundary. So where did she get the 2% from? Well, rather conveniently, in the past I have actually covered this 2% false reporting of rape statistic. This was covered back in July 2015 in my video, Teal Deer, Where Are All the Outraged Feminists? And I'm just going to drop in the relevant section, because it explains where the 2% figure came from and why it is completely inaccurate. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a slightly younger version of myself de-explaining the 2% false rape allegation figure to you. A common figure that you will hear a lot of feminists talk about is the 2% rate. That is the assertion that only 2% of all rapes that are reported are actually false. I'm sure we're all familiar with images such as this from the Enliven project. And this 2% figure is something which has been quite extensively studied, and its origins have been traced back to Susan Brown Miller's paper, Against Our Will. Her citation for this figure is a single speech made by one judge before a small group of lawyers, and the source was a statistic for a single area of New York. But if you actually check her writing, you will find something rather interesting. First of all, the information is nigh 3 decades, by now over 4 decades, out of date. It initially found that 20% of all rapes reported to the police were determined by investigation to be unfounded. By 1973, that figure had dropped to 15%. So the rate of false accusation would actually seem to be 15%, but let's see where they get the 2% from. When New York City instituted a special sex crimes analysis squad and put police women instead of men in charge of interviewing complainants, the number of false charges in New York dropped dramatically to 2%. So instantly, this is a bit of an anomalous result. But what it would seem to indicate is that if you have a police woman interviewing a woman who claims to be raped, that there is a possibility that a woman would be less likely to lie to another woman, or more likely to lie to a man who is interviewing her. Or it's possible that because this study was conducted over a very limited time period, that this may simply be a total anomaly in which a smaller number of false accusations were made. Which is why this particular book has to conclude that ultimately we are left to conclude that there is no published study or data to support any claim that the false rape allegation is, or was, ever down around 2%. Not anywhere, even according to those who originally cited that number. Rather, the number comes from a judge giving a speech to some attorneys 30 years ago whose source has, to date, not been validated. And this viewpoint would seem to be reinforced by a paper published in 2000 entitled The Truth Behind Legal Dominance Feminism's 2% False Rape Claim Figure by Edward Greer. Now, it's a reasonably short paper which I do encourage you all to go and read in your own time, but I'm going to have to give you the Teal Deer version of it. The author looked at 3 papers where this 2% figure had been quoted and basically went through the citations to try and find the origin of it. And he found that all 3 of Professor Torrey's sources turn out to be derived from the same single source. Moreover, as best as this author could ascertain, without exception, every scholarly or semi-scholarly source that utilizes the 2% false claim proposition can ultimately be traced back to Against Our Will. Despite the plethora of pyramid citations, it turns out that there is one, and only one, underlying source: feminist publicist Susan Brown Miller's interpretation of some data, now a quarter of a century old, of unknown provenance from a single police department unit. There are no other published studies that this author could find. All of the sources cited at the outset of this article trace back to Miss Brown Miller. The author actually requested a copy of the original speech cited from Miss Brown Miller, and then goes on to state that Miss Brown Miller, who is a very meticulous and organized writer, very kindly, on my request, located and sent me a copy of this Xeroxed speech. In relevant part, the judge's speech reads, "In fact, according to the commander of New York City's Rape Analysis Squad, only about 2% of all rape and related sex charges are determined to be false, and this is about the same as the rate of false charges of other felonies. These judicial remarks do not suffice to determine whether or not there was an underlying written report. although the locution used is suggestive of being based on a quotation from a newspaper article rather than a formally written text. When I contacted the then judge's law clerk, and he made inquiry of all those directly involved in the preparation of the Judge Cook's speech, their best recollections are that they did not rely upon any report, but cannot remember precisely how they did obtain the 2% figure. Of course, it remains possible that some such report was generated, but as of this date, no one is able to adduce it. Without the document, one cannot analyze the underlying data, the protocol used in evaluating it, or even whether it met minimum criteria of accuracy. All of which led to the author's inevitable conclusion that it seems clear that the 2% false claim figure, which has pervaded LDF discourse, has no basis in fact. Since this figure is clearly unsupported, there is no justification for shifting the burden of proof or redefining consent in rape crimes in accordance with this figure. The shifting the burden of proof there is a reference to feminists' constant demand that basically men have to prove their innocence when accused. So back to the present, now we know why the 2% figure is a lie, we know why the 8% figure is a lie. We've basically established the total inaccuracy of every statistic that we've been presented with thus far. So now, no doubt, you are waiting with bated breath thinking, come Teal dear, tell us what the figure actually is. And I can't, because nobody seems to know what the actual rate of false reports of rape is. Especially in regards to any sort of particularly wide context, either globally or in any particular nation. A 2006 paper by Rumney, published in the Cambridge Law Journal, demonstrates rather aptly why this false rape allegation figure is such a dark number. This study was somewhat a meta-analysis which looked at numerous other papers and various other studies regarding rates of false rape accusation. And even within this meta-analysis, they do note that it can be difficult to work out exactly what constitutes a false rape allegation. For their purpose, they define it at its most basic level. A false allegation can be defined as the description of an event that the complainant knows never actually occurred. Such a definition suggests a conscious or malicious motive on the part of the complainant. There may, however, be false allegations that fall outside this definition. For example, there may be non-malicious allegations from people with particular medical conditions who genuinely believe they are victims of rape or other sexual offences, but who are mistaken as opposed to being malicious. And in their attempts to sift through this wide variety of cases and other studies spanning numerous decades, they find a wide swathe of results, in some cases as low as 1% going all the way up to 90%. Now, as you can see, some of these studies do have very low sample sizes. The 90% one, for instance, is only measuring 18 cases. So looking at that in context with all the other cases around it, that one is probably an anomaly. But you can see that quite common figures that show up is basically anywhere between about 10 and 40%, with the largest sample sizes erring more towards 10 to 20%. With such massive disparity between so many different data points, you can see why this number of false rates of rape allegation is considered to be a statistical dark number. It is basically a number that we don't know and are probably never going to know. And I would approach anyone who says they definitely know the exact percent with an extreme amount of caution. But based on the figures that we've got here across these 20 studies, I would say that the most reasonable conclusion you could draw from this is that false rape allegations are anywhere from about 10 to 40% with about a 10% margin of error. And that is such a wide margin that it's basically not even worth mentioning it. In short, a lot more study is needed on this.
Which is actually a low number in the crime world. Other crimes, like say theft, they hover around 10% false reports.
I find it rather interesting here that Laci has just said, oh, in regards to other things like false theft, it's around 10%, even though in the previous FBI document that we looked at, it actually said that overall indexed crime false reporting was about 2%. It's almost like she's gone for the category that has the highest false reporting rate to then make her other numbers the 2 to 8%, which we've already established is highly inaccurate, just to make that 2 to 8% look even smaller.
And even that 2 to 8% statistic is deceptive.
Oh, isn't it just, Laci?
It includes reports where someone accidentally identified the wrong person, reports that are thrown out because of inconsistent details, but it is a well-known fact amongst victimologists that trauma affects your memory.
You know what, Laci? The next time I look at rates of domestic violence, and we realise that it's about a 50-50 split when we look at the last 12 months category, and I make a statement that we prefer the last 12 months over lifetime because 12-month is far more accurate because people tend to forget things over time and misremember things as a result of their trauma, and someone tells me that, no, we must listen to the lifetime category because the lifetime category shows more female victims than male victims, and you're just cherry-picking by using the 12-month category, I'm going to cite you as the reason why we should prefer the 12-month category. Deal? Alright.
And that 2 to 8% includes survivors who recanted. Someone could take it back because they were lying, sure, but much more commonly, they take it back because they're being pressured to take it back, or because they've decided they'd rather just not deal with it.
Citation needed. You're pretending like you've got sources for all of this information, but you don't have anything supporting that claim. Please provide some papers or statistics or any other form of evidence that you might have that the main reason that most women recant their rape accusation is because they were pressured to by other people. Single stories or anecdotes do not count.
So what does this mean? It means that malicious, actually false reports and allegations are pretty rare, and yet doubting someone, calling them a liar when they come forward, is extremely common.
No, I wholeheartedly disagree. Look at any of the news or media coverage or any of the protests that surround any sort of rape allegation. The UVA false rape hoax, for instance, where a group of people gathered outside the frat house causing thousands of dollars worth of damage to the structure, standing outside, banging pots and pans, chanting, "It's time to confess," even though the accused were completely innocent. The Rolling Stone case, where we had the exact same sort of behaviour. Someone made an accusation, it was found to be completely false. There was a hashtag I stand with Jackie, with people still believing this woman even though it was found to be a complete lie. Even just a glance at some of the headlines surrounding the recent accusations of Bill Cosby. All of the headlines are sympathetic towards the people making the accusations. Society at large does not disbelieve women when they say they are raped. It is the complete opposite. They are instantly believed and instantly given all of the support that they could possibly need or want. And it's not uncommon for the people who they accuse, even if they are totally innocent, to face public ridicule, shaming, losing their jobs, in some cases suicide, or being beaten to death by a vigilante mob.
Many of the reasons why we're inclined to doubt someone revolve around rape myths, myths about victims, and myths about gender.
Sure, it's all about society's myths. It's not anything to do with people's actual experiences in reality, or anything to do with a certain political movement constantly telling us that 1 in 5, 1 in 4, 1 in 3, or 1 in 1 women will be the victim of rape in their lifetime. And then these figures are repeatedly shown to be complete bunk.
For one, most perpetrators aren't greasy, creepy guys who hang out in the shadows. They're just regular people in our lives.
Just gonna put this in here.
When fans, friends, family, coworkers find out that someone that they know and love did something terrible, it can be really hard to grapple with and accept, and instead, they choose to deny it.
Again, yes and no. There are those who will, of course, outright deny that someone they know, someone they like, someone they care about, someone they love can do anything bad. And as I said earlier, there are those who will just maintain a healthy skepticism. Innocent until proven guilty. I find it slightly worrying that your message here is basically just, you need to accept it.
That halo effect around a perpetrator can be so strong that you can have cases like Cosby's where nearly 60 women come forward and report and people still don't believe that anything happened.
Seeing as how up in the air the Cosby controversy still is at the moment, I'm going to limit my statements on this particular area. There are a lot of allegations, and it does seem that some of them are false, which explains why in some instances Cosby has been able to go on the attack. Time will tell how many of these allegations are actually true or not.
Sometimes the perpetrator even goes so far as to say, "I didn't do it." They're lying. This affirms people who don't want to believe that the sexual assault happened.
This is why there is now a joke going around the internet where people just say, Laci Green raped me. Because the obvious response from Laci Green to such an accusation is, well, no, I didn't do it. This is the problem with your listen and believe attitude, Laci. You're basically saying that if someone just says, oh no, they didn't do it, they're lying, it's because the person has something to hide. In some cases, someone is going to say, no, that accusation is false, that person is lying, because the accusation is false and that person is lying.
There are a lot of people, particularly in the States, who believe that in order for a rape to be real, you have to have reported it. And in order for that report to be true, a court must convict them as guilty.
Yes, both of these steps do actually help, but you're about to bring up a load of statistics, so I'll let you rattle off those numbers and then we'll look at why they're wrong.
Now, in reality, about 68% of victims of sexual crimes don't report, and only 2% of rapists ever see a day in jail.
Now, this statistic that you're quoting comes from Rain, and I know this because the source that you're listing on the bottom of your video is the same source that Rain uses for this, and this is the same statistic that we use to get images like these. Now, while these images may look very shocking, that is all they are designed to do. To look shocking. Because when it comes to actually digging up any sort of truth out of them, they are complete and utter lies. And I say this for one very distinct reason. First of all, they class all 100 of the people sampled here as rapists, thus violating the main cornerstone of our justice system, innocent until proven guilty. What these infographics are assuming is that 100 rapes definitely took place. Whereas in reality, all of those people who did not report to the police, we don't know whether or not they were raped, we have no way of knowing. Out of those who were reported to the police but did not actually go to trial, there are numerous reasons why you would never go to trial even once you've had your crime reported to the police, including things like the police finding that there is insufficient evidence for conviction or that the crime did not take place. To name but two examples, for those who went to trial, once again you are presuming that all of them are guilty, whereas there is a reason why not everyone who goes to trial ends up going to jail, for which being innocent is a very good explanation. So that's basically why this statistic of yours is complete bullshit. You are making the assumption that everyone who is even vaguely connected to the crime of rape must be guilty, and this is simply not the case.
Does that mean that 98% of people are just lying? No, it means that our courts aren't arbiters of truth, and they're not always adequately equipped to handle sexual crimes.
Well, it seems to me, Laci, that the only means for a court to be the arbiter of truth in your mind is for them to convict everyone. Just convict anyone accused of rape and put them in jail. Assume guilt in every circumstance.
Then there are myths about how a real victim would act. In reality, there's no one response to sexual assault. Different people handle it in lots of different ways.
Ah, I see we've reached the obligatory point in the video where Laci actually gets something right. Bravo!
Another myth when it comes to men is the belief that men can't actually be raped.
Well, it's a teeny bit more than a myth, Laci. It's actually written into law in many countries. British law, for instance, actually states that rape is an offence that can only be committed by a male because it is related to penile penetration. If we broaden this out and go internationally and look at cases in India, where women's rights and feminist groups have actively opposed the expansion of sexual violence law to include men as victims of rape, with one activist stating, "I oppose the proposal to make rape laws gender neutral. There is physicality in the definition of rape. There is use of power, and the victim has a stigma attached to her. If made gender neutral, rape laws will not have the deterrence value, and it will make it more complicated for judges in court."
Men want sex all the time. He had an erection. He was into it. But an erection is not consent. And increased blood flow can be a fight or flight response.
This is kind of true, but also kind of not. Obviously, erections do not equal consent. We know that men have them quite often even while they're asleep. It's something called nocturnal penile tumescence. The increased blood flow as part of the fight or flight reflex is true. However, putting these two things together is very, very unlikely. Erections don't happen purely as a result of this increased blood flow and adrenaline rush that you get from fight or flight. There's a lot of other specific vasodilation going on that actually enables the blood to specifically enter the penile tissue. The odds of an erection happening as a result of a fight or flight reflex, very slim. But hey, try it yourself. Take a gun, go and shoot at a bunch of guys and see how many of them look down and say, "God damn it, why boner?"
Lastly, lastly, one of the sneakiest and I think most pervasive reasons why people don't believe survivors is that most survivors are women.
Ah yes, it's time for the inevitable bit about patriarchy. But before we get there, I'd just like to take a note about Laci's language throughout this entire video. Have you noticed how it's not accused and accuser, it's always been perpetrator and survivor? In her mind, every single accusation is true. Every single accusation, the guy is guilty and the girl is a victim. No questions asked.
There are many subconscious sexist beliefs that we learn all throughout our lives that come in and inform our opinions. That women lie a lot, we're not trustworthy, we're manipulative, bitches be crazy.
Well, looking through the contents of your videos so far, Laci, I've seen a lot of lies, a lot of misrepresentation, which to me indicates you're not very trustworthy and a little bit manipulative. Have you maybe thought about trying to not be a crazy bitch?
When those attitudes and biases within ourselves go unchecked, they absolutely do real damage.
You better check those biases, shitlord. But seriously, that requires you to have accepted the original premise that actually this is how people think of women en masse. And that's just not something that I agree with. We constantly see in society all manner of very positive stereotypes surrounding women, such as women being more caring than men, more nurturing than men, and we constantly see article after article after article in the media telling us about how much better than men women are constantly.
But wait, what if it really is actually truly false? False reports are illegal, and they're typically taken pretty seriously when they surface.
No.
It's really important to talk about them, because ultimately, in this fight, we're fighting for justice, for everyone.
When your idea of justice is convict those who are merely accused, I have to disagree with your definition of justice.
So we need to pay attention in the rare moments that this happens to address them, to better understand them, and we do a whole lot of talking about false reports.
Indeed you do. Might I suggest, Laci, that you do a little less talking and a little more listening. That way, in the future, you might avoid publishing videos that are filled with outright lies.
Which is why we also need to talk about the reality that sexual assault accounts are nearly always true.
Except that, as demonstrated earlier, we don't know whether that is the case or not.
How we more readily believe someone who says they've been robbed than they've been raped.
One of these is a lot easier to quantify than the other. Ultimately, this is an apples and oranges comparison and means nothing.
How men are far more likely to be sexually assaulted than to be falsely accused.
This still relies on your faulty assumption that we actually know the rates of false accusation, and we don't.
How it's far more common that a survivor is convinced to back down by the public, friends, family, even the police, when something horrible did happen.
Listen and believe, right? Because if a woman says it happened, then it obviously happened. Because women are incapable of lying, aren't they, Laci?
We need to talk about how widespread myths and disbelief protect abusers and allow them to keep on abusing others.
Are you going to also demand that that standard you've just laid out is applied to people who falsely accuse others?
If false reports are something that worries you, know that statistically, you're on the side of reason and justice and truth to believe someone who comes forward.
Except that, as we've laid out over the past 30 minutes, that's not the case. The more sensible thing to do would be when someone makes an accusation, by all means, listen to them, support them, comfort them. But do not blindly believe. Ensure that they go to the police so that the search for evidence can begin immediately.
We need to be willing to face the truth, to approach justice honestly, even when the perpetrator is someone that we know and love.
You mean when the accused. Someone is not a perpetrator just because someone claims that they did something. Because otherwise, Laci, you are a rapist. Because Laci Green raped me.
So to April Fletcher and any survivor who finds the strength to come forward on YouTube or beyond, I believe you. And one day I hope that the world does too.
I, on the other hand, hope that they don't. I hope that people encourage these individuals to go to the police so that the search for actual evidence can begin. This listen and believe attitude, this guilty until proven innocent nonsense needs to end.